Welcome, one and all, to the very first episode of Blissful Discussions. Now, if you've seen some of my other content, this show is a little different. It's a lot less cuts and edits, and more just straight-up discussions. I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm not going to cut them out. You're just going to hear long-form discussions of whatever we're talking about. Now, the topic for today is the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. If you want a shorter form idea of what the game's all about, feel free to check out my impression video on my other show, Ignorant Opinions. But today we're going to be going more in depth on the game itself with some spoilers. Not that there's a lot of story to go over. That being said though, let's get into it. So for today, let's start off at the beginning with the very first game in the Insane Trilogy, Crash 1. This game has a lot of problems. Originally, in my opinion video, I played a little bit of each game and overall was very impressed with the product and its presentation. But all of these problems that were under the surface that I just hadn't seen yet have really shown their true colors through more playthroughs of Crash 1 specifically. Crash 1 is just not designed to be a 2017 game. As great as it is, they almost stayed too true to the original format that they created it in. The gameplay is not rewarding enough and way too demanding. There are levels that took me hours to beat. I'm not a bad gamer by any stretch of the imagination, but when it literally takes over an hour for me to get through one level, that's a problem with the game, not with the player. Crash 1 is a fantastic nostalgic trip, but all that nostalgia comes with a really heavy price. That being said though, the visuals in this game are absolutely fantastic. Everything is in the up-resed 4K or 4K, for those of us who like to use the real words. It looks absolutely gorgeous. The sound design is amazing. It really does make you feel like you're playing the original game back on the PS1, but just with much, much better graphics. Speaking of fair gameplay, that's kind of where it gets into a little bit of a gray area, because actually, this game is a little too fair, and that's the problem. A lot of the targeting has to be exactly precise. You can't miss a panel that you're jumping to by any amount. And this is a problem that games back like Mario 64 solved, where people don't want to play a game where they have to get exactly perfectly on a panel when they're jumping to it or a platform. I would jump on many platforms and barely be on it and then slide off and fall to my death. That's just not fun gameplay. At a certain point, you need to accept the fact that you're not playing an incredibly precise platformer. You want to play this game for the fun. I'm going to touch real briefly on story because the Crash Bandicoot series isn't exactly known for its enthralling and long-winded story. It's fine. It gets you from point A to point B. These games have never been about story though, so it's really forgettable, and I found myself just skipping through a lot of the dialogue. Alright, now let's move on to Crash 2, Cortex's Revenge. This game does take some small steps in the right direction, but overall, it's not much better than Crash 1, which is strange because most people talk about it like it's the best in the series, and that it has massive leaps and bounds from Crash 1 to Crash 2. I found myself getting equally as frustrated with Crash 1 and 2 though, in its terms of like difficulty and just overall frustration. There were so many points in that game as well where I was just bored with the platforming because of how precise you had to be with everything. Nothing really changes with the sound and visuals from game to game. It has the same beautiful graphics as the first game, great sound design, all of that is totally great and really brings up a bunch of nostalgia for me. Again, same with this one. Story in this isn't really a huge thing. There isn't a lot to go over. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I don't think it really needs to when you're a marsupial running around fighting an evil doctor. My biggest problem with Crash 2 is that it's pretty forgettable. I have fond memories of 1, and I played all the way through 2, now I'm remembering after playing this game, but I just don't remember it. There are no levels in Crash 2 where I'm like, oh man, that level was great, or that level was super frustrating and I remember it for a certain reason. It's just kind of a throwaway game in my opinion, and possibly the worst out of the 3. After all that, we finally come to Crash 3 Warped, my personal favorite out of the 3 games that I played. Warped is actually kind of an interesting scenario for me, because I actually found it to be my favorite of the 3 games, but I never played it growing up, so there was no nostalgia factor. It feels like a lot of the platforming was perfectly refined and fits a lot better. Things aren't as challenging and make a lot more sense. The hitboxes are different, a little bit here and there anyway. The platforming is much less precise, so you don't have to be perfect on every single moment of every single level. Part of me wonders why they didn't transfer over that platforming to Crash 1 and 2 even though I understand that they might want to keep the original feel of those games, I feel like it would have created a better and more fun experience overall if they had brought the platforming from 3 into 1 and 2. Keeping on the gameplay topic though, I didn't actually find the vehicle levels to be too challenging or too frequent. That's the biggest complaint that most people seem to have with Crash 3, is that there's so many vehicle levels and they're really frustrating and they're such a grind, but I actually didn't find them to be too bad. In fact, they kind of changed it up in a nice way where there was one per each section, where they felt spaced out and broke up the kind of platforming monotony that you can kind of get into. I'm going to make this part really short. Visuals, sound, story, great, weird, but fine, nothing to really focus on. Check, the first 2 games for that kind of stuff. It's all pretty much the same across the board on that. So, after all this discussion, here's the thing. This game is only $40, but if I could do it over, I probably wouldn't pay $40 for it. I'd wait for a sale for it to be $20. For $20, you can go in, play each game for a couple hours, and not feel bad about spending a ton of money. But each time I got about halfway through one of the games, I didn't really want to keep going. I kind of felt not forced, but like I had to. Like, oh, well, I really want to get to the next thing. I remember this thing from my nostalgia, so I really want to see what happens and keep going. But if I could take that time back, I probably would. It just wasn't that much fun after several hours, and especially once you get to the 3rd game, and even though things are better, you feel like you've just done so much platforming up to this point that it's a little monotonous, and your nostalgia just can't take you through that anymore. Overall, obviously this review has been a little negative, and don't get me wrong, there are positives to this, but I do feel like they're outweighed by the amount of negativity that this game kind of brings up in me, and all the frustration I find with it. This is a good game, or at least it was a long time ago, but I feel like people are just giving it too much credit with their nostalgia. With all that being said though, thank you so much for watching. My name is Bliss. Feel free to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to my channel if you want to see more content. I put up videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but that being said, take it easy.